Alright guys, watch. Watch, 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 watch.
Hellfire for the Hellfire Throne.
Watch. Despair. Oh! Do you guys see how much damage that was? Yo, what's up everyone? It's me again, back with another video. Okay, so this is probably going to be my last build slash video of the league, but I think this build's really special, so I'm kind of excited to make this video on it. So this is probably the highest damage build I've ever played in Path of Exile SSF, or PoE in general. This build has like 75 million DPS. It's really good at farming bosses and a reasonable set of defenses as well. I cleared all Ubers multiple times on this build. T17s are really good on this build as well, which I'll show a bit later. But yeah, okay, so without further ado, this is Ward Stack Molten Strike Pathfinder. And I was inspired to make this build originally by someone who made a YouTube video on ward stacking kinetic fusillade. And the main idea is to use the new Olroth bloodline where you can restore 5%, or you can have a 5% chance on hit to restore your ward. And this is pretty huge because if you have a skill that hits really fast, you can basically have really, really good uptime on ward. And that allows ward to not be so bad of a defensive layer because normally ward has a downtime of like 2 seconds, which you can make it faster, but you know, it takes a lot of investment to scale ward. So without a way to like have it have really good uptime, it's like not that good. So this Olroth bloodline allows us to kind of turn ward into a pretty good softcore defensive layer. And then the offense of this build basically comes from the Nightgrip gloves, which allows you to gain a huge amount of flat added chaos damage. And then also the Yinda's stand belt, which allows you to convert your body armor's armor and evasion into ward. And now that, you know, defensive numbers on body armors have been buffed, you can get a pretty significant amount of base ward from using this belt. So that's the main idea of this build. Just add a bunch of chaos damage and then, you know, use Molten Strike. Molten Strike is really special for this build because, you know, it's one of the skills that hits the most times per second. Molten Strike plus Nimis will hit around 20 times a second if you maximally invest into projectiles, or sorry, 20 times per attack. And then in my PoE, I have like 6 to 7 APS. So it ends up being somewhere from like 150 to 200 hits per second. And that gives the build really, really good ward uptime. And with that, we can also scale other forms of sustain, like life gain on hit. And then also being a Pathfinder, which can naturally scale chaos damage, we're also able to put in some Progenesis Petrified Blood tech. And the main idea behind this is to, like, Petrified Blood allows us to get Overleech endurance charges with a new graft, and also doubles the efficacy of regen and recoup. And then Progenesis kind of offsets the increasing of our max hit from Petrified Blood and gives us more delayed damage and more effective HP. And that's also scaled with Pathfinder. And yeah, that's like the main idea of the build. And I'll cover everything in detail later in this video, all the gear, full POV and everything, but I just wanted to like talk about the build at first, you know, just briefly. So yep, that was 10 out of 10 Ubers done on this build. And then here I have a T17 Abomination that I also wanted to showcase, as I think it'd be a good idea just to showcase some mapping footage as well. So this build is a bosser. The build is not optimal for mapping. I would say that if you want to make this build, just know that, you know, it is optimal for bossing. Bossing is incredible on this build, but there are definitely going to be better mappers, you know, like Molten Strike is definitely not known to be a super good mapping skill. You can make it a little bit better by doing like, you know, substituting concentrated effect for increased AoE and investing into faster proj on the tree rather than slower proj. So it is bearable to play this build in maps, but you know, it's definitely not the best ever. So like this character is like only level 94 and I just took it like straight into bossing because that's like what the build was naturally good at. But as you can see, you know, the defenses is decent enough for T17s. You know, I'm like tanking a lot of hits here, but because of Petrified Blood Progenesis, you know, like I'm recovering a lot of HP and not dying. And then because the build scales attack speed heavily, Whirling Blades is pretty fast, so you can have some pretty good mobility. And the damage is pretty good, so like anything that you hit is going to be dead. So yeah, yep. And then of course this build being chaos damage, you know, the best damage type, the build can run a lot of map mods, right? Like max ES, extra ES does nothing. Endurance charge, PDR, reflect fizz, reflect ele, all of it basically does nothing for chaos damage. So like a really good build for like juice T17 farming, in my opinion. So here we have the T17 bosses, and you can see how fast they die. All right, there's one, there's two, there's three, all dead. Have the boss drop despair, start attacking, and 2 seconds later it's dead. And that was with 45% more monster life. So, yep. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into the character, the gear, the tree, and everything like that. Okay, so here we have my character, Smokey's GMO Corn Dog, level 94 Pathfinder. This is the character. If we just pull up PoE real quick, we have this. So this character, 75 million DPS, and pretty high ele and chaos max hits. Physical max hit is a little bit lacking, but it's really hard to fix this in PoE. And then we have 20 projectiles per attack and 6.7 APS, so that's pretty good. We have 84 max res, 13,000 armor, around 10,000 ward, and that's basically the main numbers of this build. Okay, so how does this build work? Okay, so at its core, this build basically combines two really powerful mechanics together. The first mechanic is ward stacking with Nightgrip. We have like 10,000 ward with Flask, and then that means Nightgrip will give us added chaos damage equal to 10% of that. So we have 1,000 added chaos damage, right? And that's like the main offensive like juicer in this build. And then we're also doing Molten Strike with Nimis. And Molten Strike, you know, you hit an enemy and it makes some balls. And then with Nimis, they all return and they can hit again, like one time per ball because it does area damage. So if we just demo here, like I hit the enemy, balls go out and then they like go back in. That sounded wrong, but you know what I'm saying. And then basically by scaling less projectile speed and less AoE, you're able to like guarantee nearly all balls overlapping on one target. So when I was testing this on Eater, I was literally getting like 20 hits per attack because we have this skill firing 11 projectiles and then they come back and hit the boss again. And like some of them are going to miss, but I was getting like 18 to 20 hits when I was testing with like Golden Rule. So that's the main idea of this build. Nightgrip Ian to stand for flat added chaos damage, and then Nimis Molten Strike to get more offensive scaling. So that is like fundamentally the main idea of this build. And then with regard to choice of ascendancy, we have aforementioned Olroth Bloodline, 5% chance to restore your ward on hit. So this allows our ward to have like pretty good uptime, especially in bossing where usually we're getting hit infrequently. And then also Pathfinder, because with our huge number of hits, we have like 15 wither stacks, so Nature's Reprisal is a huge damage boost. And then also with the Nature's Boon, Nature's Adrenaline tech, we have Flask stuff. And then we're able to use Progenesis, Petrified Blood, Classic Defensive Layer to, you know, get a lot of benefit from life gain on hit, which we're getting on this claw. And then also Overleech from Petrified Blood. And then a little bit of recoup as well. Also pretty good defensive layer. So yeah, that's basically the build. Just hit a lot of times and then do a lot of damage and then make the ward restore and also make the HP go up from Progenesis Petrified Blood stuff. And then Another thing to mention as well is that I guess I maybe should have mentioned how ward works. I just assumed you guys know how ward works if you're watching this video, but to give a quick overview, so ward basically by default will absorb all damage from an incoming hit and then be disabled for 2 seconds. However, with Nightgrip gloves, the cost we pay for the offensive scaling is that 75% of damage taken bypasses ward. So if we take 100 damage, only 25 of that will actually be absorbed by a ward. So if I have my flask up, then that means any hit that we take, like 2,500 of that damage is going to be prevented, right? And then like if I keep hitting, ideally the ward will keep refreshing itself because of Ulroth Bloodline. But there is some synergy between playing a Progenesis archetype and ward together. And the main idea is that ward archetypes usually have like low-ish HP, right? And then Petrified Blood Progenesis allows you to get away with having a lower HP pool, which also indirectly increases the efficacy of ward, because if you take less damage, then the more ward you have, like the more utility you have, right? Compared to like if I did not do Petrified Blood low life, maybe I had a normal life build, I have like 5k life, then the ward in proportion to my HP would be like less effective. So this kind of Progenesis Petrified Blood archetype is like super optimal. And also it doubles the efficacy of all the recovery, like recoup and life gain on hit. The only problem is that with Petrified Blood low life, you are a little bit weaker to dots. However, we do have overleech, and then a huge amount of recovery, so it's like kind of mitigated. And then we take things like Arakali Pantheon and Ralakesh Pantheon to further mitigate dots, and also 100% ailment immunity and stuff like that, max chaos res as well. So I haven't had too much of a problem with dots, but like things like Uber Cirrus, Ground Degen, and Uber Searing Exarch, like Great is kind of annoying for this build, but not that big of a deal, just like a minor annoyance. So yeah, so that's the main idea of the defensive and offensive overview, and then also the ascendancy overview. And then, yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do gear first, and then we'll do tree. Okay, so with regard to gear, I guess we just do like weapons and then armor and then jewelry, or we can do maybe uniques first. So the one item, or the 3 items that are mandatory for this build are these 3. We have Nimis, which allows Molten Strike projectiles to return and shotgun. You know, it's the most important thing in this build. If you don't have this, then you could run returning projectile support, but you would lose so much damage that I would just play a different build. So like Nimis, in my mind, is like the one most important thing for this build. You know, very lucky that I dropped this in SSF. Otherwise, I wouldn't even try to play this build. And then the classic ward combo, Nightgrip, and then Yinda's stand. And that basically allows you to get a lot of ward and stuff. Oh, and then in order to enable Yinda's stand, you need to get a body armor with a huge amount of armor and evasion. So here we have a Conquest Lamellar, the highest armor evasion base. Here, this is like a tier 2, tier 1, tier 2. So you could get better than this, especially if you had like a harvest enchant or something. But the main idea is get huge armor evasion. And then you can also do lock prefix reforge fizz to guarantee PDR on the suffix. And if you got super lucky, you could get like spell suppression and PDR at the same time. But that's like, you know, really hard to get. If you're playing trade, you could probably get that and it would be insane. But, you know, I'm playing SSF, so I just did lock prefix reforge fizz until res, and then I crafted suppression. And in this league, it's pretty easy to get this item from the tree. So, yep. And then, yeah. And then for the weapon, because we're already gaining 1,000 flat damage from Nightgrip, we don't really need like a super high like PDPS or EDPS, or I guess CDPS claw. So on this claw, we're basically just looking for like maximum utility. So like tier 1 attack speed, tier 1 crit chance, and like tier 1 multi is optimal. I got tier 4 multi, but whatever. And then the optimal prefixes would be Chaos Pen, Flat Chaos, and then hits can't be evaded. Although in SSF, I didn't have the resources to make that craft, but the instructions on how to craft everything for this build is going to be in this POB here. So if you want to like look into how to craft all this, this is your reference. But yeah, let me just quickly go over all the gear. So it is possible to craft a perfect 6 mod of this. Basically, you finish the suffixes first, which is easy to do using the tree. You just do tree with crit, and then recombinate that onto essence attack speed. And then you finish suffixes like that, recombinate onto Imperial Claw, and then you can do like lock suffix reforged chaos to guarantee +1 chaos, to guarantee flat chaos damage. And then you do lock suffix veiled exalted orb, and then unveil chaos pen. And then finally hits can't be evaded. So it is possible to like deterministically craft this if you have enough currency. This item doesn't have to be Warlord influence. I just Warlord slammed it because I had an open prefix, but yeah. And then for the Harvest enchant, I went for crit chance. You could also go for attack speed. Maybe attack speed is actually better because this build is probably crit capped anyway, but yeah. And then another benefit of going Claw is that we have like huge attacks per second and crit chance. And then further, we can use that to like use things like Nightblade support, which is huge damage, and then also take claw nodes on the tree, which is like insane crit scaling. So it's very efficient damage. And then rest of the gear, the shield is just kind of whatever. Ideally, it's just like suppress and whatever other stuff. If you want to go super like in depth, you can make like a insane shield with like suppress, max res, and like attack speed or avoid ailments. But it's pretty hard to make like a shield like that. So I was happy enough just to hit suppress, but like you could make this much better. And for the choice of base, I just went for a Cardinal Round Shield, which is the best armor evasion base, I think. And then I crafted Chance to Block. It is important to get like high life and block because this build, you know, doesn't really have too much avoidance. It doesn't really need avoidance because you do have, you know, Petrified Blood per Genesis recoup, but I think it's good to have some avoidance. So in this build, I have like, how much block? I don't even know where it says. Oh, here we go, 39% block. So I think it's important to get like 1 roll of block on the shield so you can have some avoidance, as that is basically where all of the avoidance comes from in this build, but not a big deal because we do have recoup. But yeah, it's very important to get life rolls everywhere on this build because otherwise your HP pool will be very low. All right, so moving on to other items, we have boots here. So these boots are probably the most straightforward of the whole build. You know, nothing fancy, just Essence of Loathing crafted Avoid Ailment boots, and then Avoid Ailment implicit. In this build, I get 60% Avoid Ailments from tree, 20% on the cluster, 20% on the other cluster, and then 20% on the thick skin wheel for 60% total. So as long as you get 40% avoid ailments on the boots, you can easily get 100% avoid ailments. So that's like pretty good. And then once I finished the suffixes, I just did lock suffix, veiled orb, unveil, movement speed, onslaught, and that was it. So this helmet, there's like a couple choices. This is like the most damage helmet that you can make. And this is basically, you get a runic crown, and then you get some other helmet. One of them hunter influence, the other one warlord influence. With the hunter influence, I level 85 helmet, you can do harvest reforge chaos until nearby enemies have -12 to chaos res. And then on the warlord one, you can do reforge crit until tier 1 global multi, and then just awakening orb together, and then pray that you can find a way to get life, like lock suffix reforge life or something. Pretty straightforward. You also don't have to do Awakener's Orb. You could just get a Hunter-influenced Runic Crown and then do Reforged Chaos until it's good. I did get lucky with a Maven Orb, and I made the -9, -12, but -9 is fine as well. And then if you don't want to do Influence Helmet at all, you can just go with a rare. You can basically just do like a well-rolled rare with like triple T1 prefixes, like T1 life, T1 ward, and then just like resistance on the suffix or something. And that would have been perfectly fine as well. So a lot of different options for this helmet. Another possibility is to use Faith Guard. And the Faith Guard unique helmet is this. And this helmet allows your modifiers to energy shield to apply to ward, increases and reductions specifically. So like you could play this and then maybe like tattoo ES on your tree and then maybe use like Light of Meaning energy shield, and that might give you a large amount of ward. Although I did not have Light of Meaning ES, and I feel like without Light of Meaning ES, it's probably not that good. So I just have like a rare and it's perfectly fine. And then Amulet. So for this Amulet, I'm just using Eternal Struggle. It's pretty good. Searing Exarch Dominant Eternal Struggle allows you to have 15% cull, which is really good. And then also you can get increased global defenses on this, which will make your ward go up in addition to armor and ES as well. Armor and evasion. And then, yep, that's about it. For the anointment, we anoint Whispers of Doom so that we can run a dual curse setup with Assassin's Mark and Despair. And both of those are a huge damage boost because minus Chaos Res is very rare. And then Assassin's Mark is just huge damage. So there's that. You could also run Eyes of the Great Wolf with like global defenses as well, but that's like trade league stuff. Another possibility is to run something like Astramentus or some rare with like a huge amount of attributes. And then maybe you could drop Supreme Ostentiation. I have Supreme Ostentiation here just to have an easier time capping attributes, and then also to like get a bunch of tattoos, which I'll get into a bit later, but yeah. And then for the other non-Nimis ring, we just have an Amethyst ring to cap Chaos Res. Very straightforward, just life res. Ideally you have tier 1 life, but you know, whatever. And then 1 craft of minus cost really helps out with your mana sustain. So there is that. And that's basically all the gear. And then next we can go into flasks. So we are a Pathfinder. Flask setup is basically this. Progenesis, of course. In this build, I think Progenesis has like 30% flask effect, so it's pretty good. And then triple LE flasks to allow us to get max res, very important. And then if you have like flask tattoos, you can go for increased effect prefix, but without flask tattoos, you don't go for that. But yeah, ideally you have that, and then you get 100% uptime on these increased effect flasks. And then on 1 flask, it's important to get Stun Avoid, which you can craft on the tree. You can craft on the crafting bench, and then either by taking the Perfectionist wheel, like 1 point here, or Stun Avoid tattoos, you can get 100% Stun Avoid. Very important to get Stun Avoid because this build has very low HP. So without that, you just get stunned relentlessly. So this is very important. And then the other suffixes can be whatever. I just have armor for the PDR, and then crit chance for offense. Could also go for many other suffixes like LE res or whatever, and it's all fine. And then Iron Flask. This Iron Flask is really important. Ideally, this would be tier 1 increased ward suffix, but you know, I have tier 2 and it's fine. And if I press this Iron Flask, my ward goes from 7.8k to 10.3k. So that's like a lot more damage and also defense. And then with this prefix, Flash charge when you crit, you have like 100% uptime on this whenever you're attacking because Molten Strike hits infinity times per second, and this prefix can trigger 10 times a second max. So we're basically gaining 10 charges a second on this, and that's like 100% uptime. And then I just enchanted this with use when you hit a rare or unique for the damage. And then the other ones are just charge on full. And the first 4 flasks are AFK, 100% uptime on this build. So that's basically all the gear. And now we can go into the tree. Okay, so here we have the tree. This is a Supreme Ostentiation tree. It's just that this build requires pretty heavy attributes, right? Like this body armor is like 173 strength, and we need like 98 int for this claw and stuff like that. So the build and like this boots needs like 148 int ideally. So we have a lot of attribute requirements. So that's why we go for Supreme Ostentiation. And then that allows us to ignore the attribute requirements and fully tattoo the tree. And tattoos are pretty hard to come by in SSF, but there's some really, really good ones for this build. Suppressed tattoos are very rare, but also very good. And then flask duration tattoos are also very good. And getting 1 or 2 Stone of Void tattoos also good as well, in conjunction with this Sapphire Flask with Stone of Void. And you can also get like % chance to poison on these int nodes up here, which gives you like 500k to like 1 million more damage. Not the biggest deal ever, but you know, why not? You can also tattoo increased effective marks for more damage. And yeah, that's about it. So yeah, Supreme Ostentiation here. And if this node was good, you could take it, but mine sucked. And then other than that, the tree is pretty straightforward. We take flask stuff, right? And then crit stuff. This cornered prey wheel is really good in this build because we hit like 150 times a second. So this 20% chance to bleed is like almost always up in anything that we hit. So we get huge crit from that. And then here we have less projectile speed on these 4 nodes here. For mapping, you can take increased projectile speed instead, but for a single target, you want less projectile speed. Then we take some life nodes, pretty self-explanatory. Frenzy charges from Mark Mastery. Get some claw nodes that have good stuff. And that's basically it. And then just like suppression, get additional projectile here, get additional strike on multi-shot wheel. And then this build does want to run 2 cluster setups. And so this cluster is very important for this build, although it is a bit hard to craft. This is basically 3 notable Fan of Blades cluster. And Fan of Blades is this. It allows your attack skills to get +1 proj. And that's very important to get damage on Molten Strike. So definitely want to get these clusters. 3 notable Fan of Blades. And then ideally, you also have like Mana Leech and Life Leech on these clusters as well. So here I have Fuel the Fight, which is Mana Leech. And then Feed the Fury, which is Life Leech. And then these leech bonuses are also always up because we're Petrified Blood. And we have Overleech. And then these medium clusters are also very, very important and also very easy to craft. So I'm running 4 medium clusters, all exactly the same. And these are basically medium clusters projectile damage. And they are eye-to-eye repeater. And repeater is attack speed and 30% increased damage. And then eye-to-eye is 60% increased damage. And the enemy will always be nearby because if we reduce our projectile speed and reduce our AoE, we can like get a huge amount of overlaps. So it's like 60% increased damage per node. So I literally have like 4 of these in this build. And these mediums are very easy to craft. All you have to do is harvest, reforge, attack, or caster, and that guarantees repeater. And then you just do it over and over again until you get eye to eye as well. Oh, and then to craft the large clusters, these are pretty hard to craft because Fan of Blades is like very, very low weight. What I did was basically like harvest, reforge, attack, because Fan of Blades has the attack tag. Just harvest, reforge, attack until I got Fan of Blades, and then one more mod. And then I just like Exalt Slammed until I got 3 notable. That's basically what I did. But it's pretty hard to craft this. And if you have like 2 notable, it's fine as well. Although then if it's 2 notable, Fan of Blades can sometimes be back here. And then you would have to spend 2 more points to get that. So it's like not ideal, but you know, it's playable even if it's 2 notable. And then for one of the clusters, we just have 2 suppress small clusters to help cap suppress. And here we just have double elegant form, 2 notable, 2 passive. And this one's pretty good. Elegant form is like 10 suppress and also 20 avoid ailments. So it's pretty good. And then I also had to use 1 suppression tattoo to reach cap, but that's going to be like a build to build thing. Like if you got like more suppress on the body, you would not need the tattoo, for instance. Or if you had like more tattoos, maybe you would like forego one of these jewels for like a damage jewel or something. But yeah, elegant form, pretty good. You know, 2 elegant form clusters is 40 avoid ailments. Thick skin wheel is 60. And then with the boots, you can get 100%. Pretty good. And then the other cluster, I just have some whatever jewels here. Just like life and multi. It's pretty important to get like 7% life on these jewels because the build is like very, very low life due to being a ward build. So 7% life jewels helps out a lot. And then also I have a Watcher's Eye here with determination armor. I don't know if this is optimal. You can probably just use whatever you want here, but I needed more PDR really badly, so I'm just using this. And that jewel basically gives me like 3,000 armor. So kind of covers a weak spot in this build. And that's basically the whole tree. Oh, and then we're also point blank because Molten Strike, point blank, huge damage. And that's basically it. And then Ascendancy, we talked about this before, but Olroth Bloodline, restore ward on hit, Pathfinder Wither, Flask Gain Charge, and then Nature's Boon. That's basically it. Another thing to bring up is that there's like a Flask Sustain, I guess, in general. So here I have Flask Gain a Charge every 3 seconds. If you have level 5 red influence, you can get Flasks gain 2 charges every 3 seconds, which is insane. But I did not hit that in SSF, so whatever. But yeah, if you can get like Flask gain 2 charges here, you could maybe like save a lot of points on Flask stuff. Or you could also go for +1 max res instead of Flasks gain a charge. And then if you like tattooed full flask duration, then that could work as well. Just another thing. And then I guess a final thing to mention. Oh, I also forgot to mention the rune graft. So there is one rune graft that this build really needs, which is Rune Graft of the Fortress. And the reason is that it's very difficult to come by like increases to ward. So Rune Graft of the Fortress gives this 40% ward, armor, and evasion, so it's pretty good. And then also with Supreme Ostentiation, the reduced attributes is not a downside at all. So that's like the one that is mandatory for this build. You also can do Rune Graft of Treachery to get 15% reservation efficiency. And then you maybe would be able to not run Enlighten, because in this build I'm doing like Enlighten Flesh and Stone in order to get low life. but if you didn't have Enlighten, maybe you could take Runegraft of Treachery. And this auras, which affect allies, also affect enemies, doesn't really matter because Determination doesn't matter as we're chaos damage. And then Precision, level 1, barely matters. And then Flesh and Stone, I think Flesh and Stone doesn't even affect allies, right? So that should not be an issue at all. So yeah, definitely can run Runegraft of Treachery. And then another possible Runegraft to run is Runegraft of the Bound, which is 20% increased bonuses gained from gloves. I don't know if this is good or not. You can see that like if I put this on, I gain a lot of damage. For example, my Molten Strike in Hideout is like 6609 added chaos damage. However, if I, what can I take off? This? If I take Runegraft of the Bound, that becomes 7937. So you can gain like 20% more damage if you go for this. But I don't know if it's good because it will also make more damage that you take bypass ward, right? So that would make you have like 90% of damage taken bypasses ward. So you would gain 20% more damage, but you would become substantially more squishy. So I'm not sure that that is a good idea. So I do not take it, but yeah. Another funny thing to mention that's like, I don't know if it's possible with this league, but like in theory, if there was another source of damage taken by passes ward, it might be possible to get 100% damage taken by passes ward. I mean, not this league, but like maybe next league if something is introduced like that. And then if you could get 100% of damage taken by passes ward, then your ward would never drop off. And that would be useless, I just realized, because Nightgrip scales off of ward and broken ward is still considered for Nightgrip's damage bonus. So yeah, I don't even know why I thought about that, but yeah, then that would make all your ward useless, which would be pretty funny. But I don't know, maybe you could use that in some way, shape, or form for some weird build. I don't know, but yeah, just a random thought. And that's basically the tree. And then for the grafts, we have Aegis Tool Graft. This is enabled by running CWDT Frostbomb, and that allows us to get a random shield of like 2k damage, just randomly if I'm like fighting stuff. So that's pretty good. My prefix is pretty bad. I don't even benefit from the cold damage here, but you can get like global crit chance on the prefix here, and it would be pretty good. And if you want to be like really optimal, you can get +1 strike, but +1 strike prefix on Aegis Toolgraft is like very, very low weight. So, you know, I tried to get it in SSF, but just not a chance. But like if you're playing trade, definitely get +1 strike on this, and it's insane. And then other one is Hardening Yule Graft. This Tender Embrace thing is really, really good. Basically, if you're on low life, which we are always low life because of Petrified Blood, it's just like perma 3 endurance charges. So that is good. And then for the prefix, I just have max life, which is a stat that this build desperately needs. So yep, pretty good there. And that's basically everything. All the tree, all the gear and whatever. And then all the notes, all the notes for this build are going to be just here in the POB. Here I have like a guide on how to acquire every item, how to craft every item. I also talk about alternative options for every item as well. So you can read this if you're interested in making this build. And that's about it. And then as for like aspirational upgrades, which I think I should also briefly mention. Yep, Mage Blood. I don't know if you can play Mageblade with this build because you kind of need Yinda's stand, but maybe if you had like some other way to get ward, you could do Mageblade. Because like Mageblade Iron Flask is insane. And then maybe you can like, I don't know, do some fancy stuff to get ward without Yinda's stand. So I don't know. Another thing I see people do in trade is Sublime Vision Purity of Fire tempered by War Dawnbreaker. And this allows you to convert all LE damage to fire and then also get a lot of fizz taken as fire as well. And if you do that, you can like drop the cold lightning flasks for other flasks. And that in theory is good. But Sublime Purity of Fire is like impossible to get in SSF, so whatever. Massive Threat of Hope at Shadow is also totally possible and insane. Let me just quickly demonstrate this. Where's my massive thread? Here. Oh, it's large thread. Oh, here. Okay, so this massive thread also has huge potential in this build. You can get a lot of insane things. You can get multi-shot here. And if you had like +1 strike on Aegis Toolgraft, then you could like drop this wheel entirely and like save 1,000,000 points. And then get multi-shot. Really good. Can also take a stun avoid thing here if you don't have a tattoo. And then if your Timeless Jewel is good, then you can get more stuff here, right? Although mine were bad, so whatever. Can also get damage and crit chance, 10% attack speed. You can also get all attack damage leached as life and mana if you don't have it on the cluster, so that's insane. And then also you can get Lethe Shade. And because this build has 100% avoid ailments, the downside is not there. And this will greatly improve your survivability against dots, which is the one weakness of this build. Well, this build has a couple weaknesses, but that's the main weakness. So this massive thread is insane. But because I don't have +1 strike Aegis Toolgraft, and I don't have good passives here, good notables, I did not go for it. But that is possible and very good. But yeah, I just use Watcher's Eye. Sounds like another possible upgrade. Faithguard Helmet, Light of Meaning, also possible. I'm not sure if it's better than using a rare, but Light of Meaning ES in conjunction with Faithguard Helmet, you know, just obvious, give you a lot of increased ward. Maybe if you have this in trade, you can mess around with it. What else? Suppressed tattoos and flasturation tattoos. These are insane. This build does struggle with suppress, so maybe if you tattooed suppress everywhere, you can like drop a small cluster. I don't know. And then also flasturation, you know, if you get more of this tattoo, then your flask uptime will go up. And, you know, because of Supreme Ostentiation, you can literally tattoo everything on the whole tree. So, pretty good. And then Corrupted Uniques. If you can get, like, Despair on hit corruption on the glove or, like, +1 Frenzy Charge, that would be insane. Corrupted Nimis, also good, but probably kind of crazy to go for. And then Corrupted Yinda Stand, also insane. Maybe like, I don't know, some belt corruption. I mean, anything would be good. So there's that. And then in trade, I also see some people running Eyes of the Great Wolf with increased global defenses, which seems pretty good. But I obviously don't have that in SSF, so yeah, whatever. And yeah, it's basically the whole build. Trying to think if there's anything I forgot. This is the config. We just have an Eternal Struggle Cull in here. And then, yeah, everything here is pretty straightforward. We have 10 projectile distance here for point blank and stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, all right. Well, there we go. A very rare build to pull off an SSF. I just happened to get extremely lucky and I got spooned a Nimis and Nightgrip and Yinda Stand and Progenesis. So I was just like, YOLO, I'm going to make this build. So, yep, there it is. Ward stack Molten Strike Pathfinder. Probably one of the coolest builds I've ever played in SSF. Definitely the best bosser I've ever played. I've never played a build with 75 million damage before. It was insane. I killed like so many Ubers with this. It was really fun. And if you're playing trade, you could probably take this build to even crazier heights. You could probably get like way more ward, way more defense if you have everything. So yeah, definitely a fun build to play in trade as well if you want to. Although the barrier to entry is quite high as it requires Nimis and ideally Progenesis. And those are like hundreds of divs in trade, I think. So yeah. And then going forward, I guess it's also interesting to think about like how much of this build can be played again next league. So Bloodlines are going core. So as long as Olroth Bloodline is not changed, this build should be viable next league. The grafts going away doesn't really matter too much. Aegis Tool Graft is just like a little bit more defense. And then Hardening Yule Graft is just like 3 endurance charges. So not the biggest deal if these go away. Not a big deal at all. And this build doesn't use any Foulborns. So, should be totally good to play this build next league. Although I will also say that you don't need this exact archetype next league. I think Molten Strike Nimis in general is extremely strong. And you can basically play Molten Strike Nimis with any flat damage scaling vector. And I think it would be insane for bossing. In this build, again, we're getting like 1000 flat added chaos damage. But if you had a sword, like a two-handed sword with triple T1, that's like 800 flat added damage or something total. And that would also be very powerful. So you definitely don't need to like go ward for this. Like Molten Strike Nimis in general is just insane. And then if you wanted to go this ward archetype with Nightgrip and whatever, then, you don't have to play Molten Strike. You can just pick like any skill and it would probably work. Although if you do this archetype, you probably want to like pick a skill that hits fast so you can like benefit from Olroth Bloodline and Nature's Reprisal and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty flexible. Like you can definitely like take out like bits and pieces of this build and like use them for different builds and different ideas, which I think is cool. But yeah, other than that, this build definitely playable next league, I think. Although next league in SSF, I probably won't get so lucky to drop Nimis and Nightgrip and Yinda Stand and Progenesis. So I don't know if I will be able to play this next league, but I would definitely love to play like some Ward Stacker or some like Molten Strike build next league if possible, because this build has been insane for me. So yeah. All right, well, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I probably forgot a couple things, but everything that is important is in this POB. And, item acquisition as well. I would not recommend playing this in SSF because you need some insane gear. But I do have like instructions on like how to acquire every item. For example, do this shipment to a white port to get this. So like all this is in the POB. You can like look at this. And, POB will be in the description and everything. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns about this build or if you want to try it out, because I think it's a pretty fun build and pretty good at bossing. Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to make another build this league as we are pretty late in the league and I feel somewhat burned out. I may or may not do like some more builds on stream just like for fun, but this might be like my last PoE video for this league as we are pretty late in the league. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll either see you guys like on stream or in a new video or next league. We'll see. But yep.